Well, as Ron said, that is our theme song for this year as we're looking through lessons on our work and the things that we do together. We're going to have to start putting that as the invitation song, though, because then everybody knows what my sermon's going to be about when we sing it right before the sermon. But I hope that it's something that begins to ingrain itself into our minds in the local congregation here as we seek to work together. In 2 Timothy, actually, chapter 4, and in verse 1, Paul writes to Timothy, the young evangelist there that he leaves in Ephesus, and he says, I solemnly charge you in the presence of God and of Christ Jesus, who is to judge the living and the dead, and by his appearing in his kingdom, preach the word. Be ready in season and out of season, reprove, rebuke, exhort with great patience and instruction. It's the charge that he gives to the evangelist to go and to preach, and in such a way so as to let people know what's right and what's wrong based upon truth, to encourage people to do what's right, and to find themselves on a path of continuing to do what is right, to exhort or to encourage with great patience and instruction. I know I need great patience, and I know everyone needs great patience, and I know I need great instruction. And the things that I want us to learn together this morning, for the members here in the local church and those visiting, we're happy to have you with us, and I pray the lesson encouraging to you. But the members here that have agreed to work and worship together as a member of the local church here at Wiley, we want to focus in on this idea of building up the church. That is, it is time to build. And we're beginning a series of lessons in our Bible class starting next Sunday. And so this lesson this morning kind of springboards us from there. And I want the lesson this morning to be an encouraging lesson to you. And I want you to really think about it. I'm not preaching this lesson this morning as a rebuke or a reprove. So if something about it sounds that way, that's not my intent. I want you to know that. I'm not saying that to disclaimer that I'm afraid to rebuke or reprove you. That's not it. But just to know that this is an encouragement to us, for us to all, including myself, to consider the work that we are doing for the Lord. Look at Matthew chapter 25, and you'll see the importance of the work that we do and how we ought to view it and the ways in which it has everlasting consequences to us. In Matthew 25, Jesus is talking about judgment to come, and he tells two parables. The first parable about the 10 virgins, the 5 wise, the 5 foolish. And then he tells another parable. That first one's about being prepared. He tells another parable here in the following verses. And he says in verse 14, for it's just like a man about to go on a journey who called his own slaves and entrusted his possessions to them. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, and to another 1, each according to his own ability. And he went on his journey. The way that is an easy understanding for us, I think, is to consider this parable in this way. There was a servant of his that he gave 5 talents to. This is possessions, this is monetary. And he entrusts these 5 talents to this man because he is capable, he is able, has the ability to utilize 5 talents. To the one that he gives 2, he doesn't give him 5, he gives him 2 because he has the ability to handle those 2. And to the one he gives 1. Why not 5? Because he's not able, he doesn't have that ability. But what he doesn't give, I'm not drawing too much out of this, is he doesn't look at one and say, you don't have to do anything. You set to the side, you don't have as many talents as this other guy gets because you don't have any ability, and so you get 0. He still has responsibilities for the guy with 1. And you know from the story, the guy with 5, it says in verse 20, received the 5 talents, came up and brought 5 more talents, saying, Master, you entrusted 5 talents to me. See, I've gained 5 more. So according to his ability, he went and worked. And his master said to him, well done, good and faithful slave. You're faithful in a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Go enter into the joy of your master. To the guy with 2 that he just entrusted to because he was able to handle the 2, he tells him the same thing. But yet the one who he gave 1 didn't do anything. As if he had just gone and buried it and done nothing with it, and he just gives back to his master the one talent that had been entrusted to him that his master knew he was capable of working with. He did nothing with it. And his response to that then is punishment. He says in verse 29, "For to everyone who has, more shall be given, and he will have an abundance. But from the one who does not have, even what he does have shall be taken away. Throw out the worthless slave into the outer darkness. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." And then he goes into a judgment scene from there as he talks about separating the sheep from the goats. What's my point? We better be real careful as to how we use the abilities that the Lord has blessed us with, and what his expectations are for the abilities that we have. And we've got to be honest with ourselves. As we talk about this morning, the idea of evangelism, it's easy for me to say there are people out there that are better at that than me. They have more talent at that than me. I'm going to let them do the work, and I'm not going to do any. But we better be real honest about what abilities we do have and what expectations we have from God, so that when we answer to him, we have an answer. It is most likely the case that I will never stand in front of you and go down the line and say, "How you doing with evangelism? How you doing with evangelism?" Probably the case that our elders won't stand up on this side and go down the line and say, "How you doing? How you doing? When's the last Bible study you had with somebody else?" They're probably never going to ask you that. I probably never will point blank ask you that. But the Lord will. He cares about it. He cares how we work in his kingdom. He cares how we utilize our time. I'm not convinced that he's going to line up on the day of judgment and he's going to put all the preachers in one line and he's going to put all the elders in one line. I don't think this is how it happens. And he goes down the line with the preachers and he asks them how. He gets to me and he says, "Coy, how did the members there at Wiley do with evangelism?" I don't think he's going to ask Greg and Richard, "How did the members at Wiley do with evangelism?" But he's going to ask you. And he's going to ask me. He's not going to necessarily line up the preachers and say, "I want to know who you baptized, and then I want you to just kind of get in line and let's question the preachers about that, and then put everybody else in another category and say, 'Did you come on Wednesday night?'" Like that was the only requisite of concern. The goal here in the local work that we do is encouraging one another. The purpose of the local church is to encourage one another, and that we be good workers in his kingdom, and that we be good brethren to one another. And that's what we want to build. When we sing about building up the church, we're talking about building up one another. And we're talking about building up one another in service to God, a work that we commit with one another to do these things. You've probably heard the term evangelism your whole life, and just kind of, well, what is that talking about? And you say, well, that's the evangelist then. He's the speaker, the messenger, or the sharer, or a messenger of good. That's the way the word evangelist is defined. And so then you say, well, are you evangelistic? Well, that means you're an evangelistic person, and so that describes what kind of person you are. But what does that really mean? Well, you're a teacher then. You're teaching specific to the gospel. You're a sharer of the gospel. What does that mean? That means you convert others to the Christian faith, right? Evangelism, according to the American Heritage Dictionary, just is zealous preaching and dissemination of the gospel. That is more than share the good news. Now, that's part of it. I understand that. And evangelism involves sharing the good news with a purpose. So it's easy for us to say to someone, well, I'm a Christian. I can go out and tell people I'm a Christian. I'm a Christian. I can walk up and down all the aisles at Walmart and come across people and go, I'm a Christian, I'm a Christian, I'm a Christian. Tell them that. That's not evangelism. Just telling people that I'm a Christian. I can go down the aisles at Walmart and I can tell people where I attend worship service. That's not evangelism. I can talk about God to other people, and that in and of itself is not necessarily evangelism. All those things are great. I'm not discounting them as something that we ought to be proud that we're a Christian, or that we ought to be inviting others to come and worship together. But there's a purpose then that is behind it. This zealous preaching has a purpose. I want to ask you, who do you think God requires or expects to be evangelistic? Who is it that you think, and we're not raising hands and answering questions right now, but I want you to think about it. Whose responsibility is it to be evangelistic? If we desire to grow and we desire to convert others to Christ, then that would include me. The responsibility then would be me. That's my job to be evangelistic. But I'm afraid, to be blunt, that sometimes when we talk about evangelism, it sounds like this. Couple of sermons a year on evangelism. That's kind of the minimum requisite that preachers got to preach a couple of times a year on evangelism. And there are a few people that have they're those 5 talent people, you know. They have that higher ability. And they have this personality that's maybe different, and they're really good at it. And there are people that are exceptional at it. And what we do is we go to those people who are really good at evangelism, and they're really good about studying with a purpose and all those sort of things. And we congratulate them on doing that good work. But ourselves maybe never has any change about it. We say, well, it's kind of like, I didn't care about it because I didn't think that I had the ability to do anything, and I didn't know what I needed to do, and so therefore I'm really happy for the people that do something, but I'm not necessarily on the right track in considering myself. In Matthew 28, just a couple of chapters later, where we were studying in Bible class this morning, the Great Commission is given there in verses 18 through 20. And Jesus clearly says, all authority has been given to me in heaven and on earth. And we noticed in class this morning that all authority is related to matters of salvation. He's already had all authority, but he's giving information as to what the requisites of salvation are. Yes, I said the requisites of salvation. He's going to cover one of them here. He's going to cover 2 of them here. He's going to cover all of it here, if you will. Because he says you're going to have to go and teach. Now, I know he's talking to the apostles, but he's giving them their commission here. Go, therefore, and make disciples of all the nations. Go and make followers. Go and be go and make learners. People that are interested in the fact that Jesus is the Christ. Go and make disciples means go and make people that understand who Jesus is. He is the Son of God. We could put it this way. People who believe, but he doesn't stop there. It's not belief. Belief's not the totality. He says baptize in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Baptism a requisite. But who's going to be baptized? Those people who are disciples, those people who are learners, those people who recognize that Jesus has all authority in matters regarding salvation, and teach them. Teach them to observe all that I command you. Now, I will admit readily that he is talking here to the apostles. And while this charge is specific to apostles, do we think that those were the only ones that needed to teach? Turn back to chapter 10 of Matthew. Matthew chapter 10. Just notice what Jesus says in Matthew chapter 10 and verse 32 and 33. 32, 33, Matthew chapter 10. He says, therefore everyone who confesses me before men, I will also confess him before my Father who is in heaven. Think about that. That Jesus says, you say my name, here in the text where he said, you say my name, I'll say yours. You say my name, you share my name here, I'll share yours. Verse 33, whoever denies me before men, I will also deny him before my Father who is in heaven. Which of you wants that? Which of you wants to keep your mouth shut about Jesus and about the gospel message and about the truth of the gospel and deny him before men so that he can deny you before the Father in heaven? So a Christian has work to do. It's not just for evangelists. It's not just for apostles. And there's no living apostles today. And it's not just for super gifted people that are just really good personally in regards to evangelism. I put Acts chapter 8 here on the slide. I want you to consider Acts chapter 8 because Saul is going about persecuting the church. You see, in chapter 7, Stephen's preaching, and at the end of his preaching, he greatly upsets the Jews that he's talking to, and they stone him to death, and they lay their garments at the feet of a young man named Saul. He was consenting to Stephen's death. And in verse 1 of chapter 8, it says, Saul was hearty agreement putting him to death. And on that day, a great persecution began against the church in Jerusalem. They were all scattered throughout the regions of Judea and Samaria, except the apostles. Some devout men buried Stephen and made loud lamentation over him. Saul began ravaging the church, entering house after house, dragging off men and women, and he would put them into prison. Those who had been scattered went about preaching the word. That's the men and women who were disciples. This is not talking about those that would stand behind the pulpit. It's talking about the saints that had been scattered. Preaching there is not talking about in this public setting like this. It's talking about teaching. The word preaching is used that way to talk about teaching. They were persecuted. They had to scatter all of them. And as they went about, they were preaching. They were teaching others the gospel. We might put it this way. They were seeking to convert others to the Christian faith. They were being persecuted. What response do we have? What responsibility then do we have? Well, it's the work of the evangelist, right? He's the guy that's at the front. And I guess I'll be blunt here for just a moment. It's not my job to conduct your Bible studies for you. Now, there are many that would say, just get me the leads. Give me their phone numbers. I'll call them. I'll set up the Bible studies, and I'll conduct the Bible studies for you. That's not it. Look in 2 Timothy chapter 2. Paul's very clear. Now, stay with me until I get to the end of this point. In 2 Timothy chapter 2 and in verse 2, here's my responsibility. And this is what we're going to be diligently working on Sundays and Wednesdays in our time together. He says to Timothy, a preacher, the things which you heard from me in the presence of many witnesses, entrust these to faithful men who will be able to teach others also. He is talking to a preacher in Ephesus, and he says, you teach men to teach other men. You teach people to teach people. My job is not to do your Bible studies for you. My job is to get you ready to do the Bible studies. My job is to teach you and to equip you in such a way that you can go and do the work God expects of you. That's my responsibility as an evangelist. Now, my job to do the work in your place, but and frankly, let me be extra frank about this. Preacher-driven evangelism is bad news. And you say, "What? How could you say something like that?" It's dependent upon one man. What happens when he's gone? It's not good for the local church. But more importantly than that, preacher-driven evangelism is bad for the kingdom. It's good when the members organically do the work that God expects for them to do. And so you need to think about it, and I need to think about it in this way. If I had a study today, and out of the blue, I was talking with someone, maybe after services today, I was talking with someone, and they said, I'd like to study the Bible with you. What would you teach? What would you pick as the first lesson? Where would you go in your Bible? Have you equipped yourself to be a teacher in this way? Who cares how many people the preacher's baptized, I don't keep notches on my baptism clothes or something like that, like a baseball bat. Baseball player knocks home runs and puts a notch in his bat like Babe Ruth used to. No, that's not it. The question is, how many people are coming to Christ because members of a local church are doing the work that God's given them to do? How are we accomplishing what God wants? If evangelism is our responsibility, we can have an evangelistic preacher, and that's good, but if it's all of our responsibility, it's not centered upon him. And by the way, I'm happy to study the Bible with anyone. So don't discount what I'm saying right now and say, well, he just doesn't want to do anything but preach on Sundays and Wednesdays. That is not true. I am saying this. I'm saying my responsibility to study with others is not because I'm the preacher. It's because I'm a Christian. Just the same as it is for every one of you sitting in the audience who is a Christian. The responsibility is for Christians and not exclusive to evangelists. And so evangelism is a work of the church. And what do I mean by that? What do I mean by church when I say church? It's God's people. That's the simple way to put it. It's not exclusive to preachers or elders or deacons. And so I want us to change our mindset in how we view evangelism and the work of the local church. It's great to have a capable evangelist. That's not what I'm saying that that's the bad idea behind it, but we will have more opportunities and we will do more work if we are actually involved individually as we should be. For it's simple like this. I don't know the people you know. I don't go to work with the people you go to work with. I probably never will meet the people, all of them that you are associated with. And even if, how long will it take for me to actually know them or to develop some sort of relationship with them? If we can change our mindset to be more evangelistically minded, we will be able to reach more people. We have to be willing to have Bible conversations with others. And we have to be encouraged by that and get excited about that. But if we don't know what to do, if we don't know what to teach when that Bible study falls into our lap, here's what we do. We panic. You get that Bible study today, you talk to someone and they say, I'd like to study the Bible with you, and you panic. And you call me. I know, you call the preacher. It's okay, I've called the preacher before. It's all right. And you say, what should I do? And let me clarify, please do call. That's great. I have no problem with that. You got my phone number, give me a call. But be prepared that I'm not going to tell you on the other end of the phone, give me their number so that I can sit down and have a study with them. That's not the purpose. I'm going to say, let's get ready, you and I, for you to have that Bible study with them. That's the evangelistic mindset of the local church that we need to be building upon. It may make you nervous. It may be building up a little anxiety with you. But this is biblical. Look in 1 Thessalonians chapter 1. 1 Thessalonians chapter 1. The church at Thessalonica was working and growing. In verse 8, he says, in talking about the brethren in Thessalonica, 1 Thessalonians chapter 1, and in verse 8, he says, the word of the Lord has sounded forth from you, not only in Macedonia and Achaia, but also in every place your faith toward God has gone forth, so that we have no need to say anything. For they themselves report about us what kind of reception we had with you. So the they there, that's the places that Paul would go and visit. So they themselves report. So where Paul was visiting, report what kind of a reception we had with you and how you turned to God from idols to serve a living and true God, to wait for his Son from heaven, to whom he raised from the dead, that is Jesus, who rescues us from the wrath to come. So do you see what's happening in verses 8 through 10? Paul's traveling and preaching. And he goes to a city, and as was his habit, he'd go into the synagogue, and he would say, I need to tell y'all about some people. I need to tell you about some people back in Thessalonica. And they say, well, hang on. Oh, we know about those people from Thessalonica. You see, there were some Christians here, and they were here and they were talking about the way they used to live and the way they used to be idols, and they taught us and they told us about how they changed because of the gospel of Jesus, and they taught us about how they obeyed the gospel, and we've already obeyed the gospel. That's the fruits of the evangelistic efforts of the local church there in Thessalonica. How many of us is it going to take to get on board with being evangelistic to make this happen? Now, I know you're saying, hang on, Coy, you missed a verse. James chapter 3. And James chapter 3, that's a nerving verse. I mean, James chapter 3 and in verse 1, let not many of you become teachers. So hang on. We need to really limit it, right? Because James 3 and verse 1, you're telling me I've got to go teach people, and I'm to be encouraged to go and do that, but not many of you to become teachers. And the reason in James 3 and verse 1 is knowing that as such we will incur stricter judgment. So see, I need to be real careful about going out and teaching others. Yeah? You do. Look a little bit more in the chapter, though. Look in verse 6. He says the tongue is a fire. That's the teacher's tongue, by the way. He's not talking about just run-of-the-mill words. That's not it. He says the tongue is a fire, the very world of iniquity. The tongue is set among our members as that which defiles the entire body. It sets on fire the course of our life and is set on fire by hell. This is somebody teaching in such a way to cause jealousy, self-centeredness, their undeveloped immaturity, however you want to put it. Verse 13, who among you is wise and understanding? Let him show by his good behavior his deeds in the gentleness of wisdom. But if you have bitter jealousy, selfish ambition in your heart, do not be arrogant and so lie against the truth. So here's the way that this works out. Yes, he says in verse 1, let not many of you become teachers. Well, why? Why would we not want many to become teachers? Well, because there were some that he's writing to that were jealous and self-centered and immature and undeveloped. And if that describes you, then no. You need to be real careful about being a teacher. And we need to help you with that. Let's study about it, you and I. You study with several, if that would be the case, to help us in that regard. But if you're looking at yourself and saying, teaching others is not out of jealousy, and teaching others is not because of my immaturity or whatever that might be, then it's time to get up and start teaching. In my opinion, just my opinion for a moment, there are many people that I've come in contact with that are not in need of being taught about evangelism. They're faithful. They know they shouldn't be jealous. They're not immature in this way, but they're not teaching. And they're not preparing to be teachers. And you know there's a verse for that. We'll close our lesson with it in Hebrews 5 and verse 12. Now I know, I'm not ready to close yet. Don't go there. I know that we all have different abilities and talents. That's where we started our lesson this morning. And some people would say, others are just more outgoing than me. I'm shy and I'm reserved. I understand that. We have different abilities and talents. I get all of that. But as God's people, as Christ's people, the congregation here at Wiley, how are we doing in seeking to convert others to the Christian faith? I want us to change our mindset. And by mindset, I'm talking about mindset's a way of life, and you might call it the culture, the church culture, might be the way that you want to put it. I want us to change our culture. I want us to think differently about this. I can describe it to you in this way. If you visited many churches throughout your life, you can, I think, understand it. You can walk in and you can feel, and this is kind of unique. It's not weird, not tingly feeling. but you can understand what the expectations are there. You can understand as you're part of a group what the mindset is amongst the members there. And you can see and you can get the vibe of saying, well, the local church here is made up of members and they physically assemble. That might be something that you grab a hold of. And if I were to be a member of that local church, there won't be much expected of me. I'll be able to come in, I'll be able to sit back, and there won't be many requisites, won't be much required of me. You can feel that culture when you're around others. Or you may go to a group and you feel the complete opposite about that, where you come in and you meet others and you see active and you understand that the mindset in such a way to say, if I am a member there, they're going to expect me to be busy. And they're going to expect me to be working. And that's the vibe, if you will, that I get. Not something, I'm not talking about traditions or traditionalism or anything like that, but what Christ wants me to do, how I'm working it, and how we're working it together. And I don't want us to change our mindset, and I don't want us to change our culture in regards to evangelism for me. I don't want you to change the culture and the mindset here because of the elders or the deacons or something like that. I want us to do it for Christ and for the work of Christ, to help each other to accomplish this mindset that there are others in the world that we need to be having Bible studies with and talking to and reaching out to. And that should be part of our mindset. So I want to close with a few thoughts. Ephesians chapter 4. And we're going to be looking at these in more of our classes that we're about to have in the coming weeks, as I'm going to give you tools to what you can teach. I will guarantee you, if you come to Bible class, not this Wednesday, we're finishing up the quarter, but starting next Sunday, on Sundays and Wednesdays, you will leave the first class, and if you have a Bible study, you will have something in your hands, and you will know how to teach it. You'll have 2 things in your hands by the end of the second class. You'll have 3, 4, 5 different things that you can grab tools from and be prepared to go out and to be teaching. Look at here in Ephesians chapter 4. I just want us to change at least this little thing. When you come in contact with people, you've got to change how you look at them. You've got to change how you look at others and how you view others. When you're checking out at Market Street, the person that's ringing up your groceries is not just another person. That's a soul that Jesus died for. And your mindset and my mindset has to change to the point that when we look at others, we don't see them as the person that cut us off on the road. We see them as a soul that needs saving, that Jesus suffered and died for. And when we change that mentality, we will become intentional about the things in which we do. Ephesians chapter 4, look at verse 11. He gave some as apostles, some as prophets, some as evangelists, some as pastors and teachers. Which one are you? Well, I'm not an apostle. We don't have any living apostles today. Not a prophet. We don't have any living prophets today. Evangelist, well, that one will fit. I'll take that one, I guess. Sharer of the good news. Pastor, that's a shepherd or an elder. That would eliminate all but a couple of us then this morning. So you're either a teacher or you're saying you didn't make the list. Far too often we think of the church work in a corporate model. And we think of Ephesians 4 verse 11 as the corporate model. That you've got Christ, He's the head, and then there were apostles and prophets. And then, well, they're all gone. We have the word revealed, preserved for us. Okay, so we kind of draw a line there. And then we come down and we go, we got the evangelists, we got the elders, and you may put deacons there. And then you draw a line, and you know everybody else is a consumer. That's not what the local church is. The local church is not filled with consumers. It wasn't true in Acts chapter 8. It wasn't true in the Thessalonian church. You can leave in evangelism. You can leave in evangelists and teachers and all that sort of stuff. And notice what happens here in verse 12. He says, for the equipping of the saints. The equipping of the saints to do what? To work. To serve. If you want to say those things listed in verse 11 aren't me, I'm not the evangelist, I'm not one of the teachers, I'm not one of the pastors, I'm not in. Well, guess what? If you just want to say, I'm just a run-of-the-mill saint, I'm just a run-of-the-mill Christian, guess what? The purpose he put in place was for the equipping of the work of the saints for the work of service, to the building up of the body of Christ, until we all attain to the unity of the faith and of the knowledge of the Son of God, a mature man, to the measure of the stature which belongs to the fullness of Christ. Now you might argue and say that teaching and that evangelism is left to just mature Christians, but that's not a fair statement. If all teachers and evangelists are mature, then all mature Christians are teachers and evangelists. You can't have it both ways. In other words, you cannot say, I am a mature Christian and I'm not a teacher. You can't say, I'm a mature Christian and I'm not salt or light, Matthew chapter 5. In verse 15, he says, speaking the truth in love. Brethren, I don't know how old the sign is out on the end of the road, but that's the one we got on it. Speaking the truth in love. We're to grow up in all aspects into Him who is the head, even Christ. It is God's will for us to speak the truth in love. All of us should be working. I'm not saying that we're all going to leave here today and everyone is equipped and ready to teach. I'm not saying that. But I'm saying that our goal and our purpose should be to head towards that goal. And to head in that direction that I say I've got to get better at it, and I'm working at it, and I'm headed that way. And maybe I need a little bit of help. Verse 16. From whom the whole body being fitted and held together by what every joint supplies, according to the proper working of each individual part, causes the growth of the body for the building up of itself in love. What every joint supplies, every single one of us is important. Every part of the body matters. I am not convinced that sharing the good news about Jesus is just something that a few should be doing. All of us who are Christians should be able, willing, and looking for opportunities to share the gospel of Jesus Christ. Let's close in Hebrews chapter 5 and verse 12. I'm going to get real personal for a moment. I heard a preacher use this example, and I'm going to know there's no new ideas, so I'm taking it from him. Hebrews chapter 5 and verse 12. Remember our lesson? I pray it's encouraging to all, but as a family here of Christians who have agreed to work and worship together at the local church here at Wiley, I want us to consider this. Hebrews chapter 5 and verse 12. For though by this time you ought to be teachers. How long was that? How much time? He does, sometimes you say, well, I wish it said, for though by this time, that he said, for though by 20 years you ought to be teachers. Is that 3 years? Is it, I've been a Christian for 3 years, now I ought to be a teacher? Maybe it was 5 years. I got to be a Christian 5 years. He doesn't say that. I need you to ask yourself, some of you have been Christians longer than I've been alive. By this time, you ought to be teachers. Is it 5 years? 10 years after being a Christian? How long is it? It's time. If I can paraphrase what the writer here of Hebrews 5 and 12 is saying, it's time for you and I to prepare ourselves and to get to the work that God expects us to do. It's time for us to consider the places we go, the people that we come in contact with, as a work that's right before us and an opportunity that is right before us. It's time for us to seek the soul that needs saving through Christ's sacrifice, and to be working towards that every single day until the day we meet Him. Thank you for your attention. I pray the lesson to be an encouragement to us all, to exhort us all to get busy with the work, and to encourage everybody to be sure that we're coming to gather our tools together as to what we can teach and having opportunities before us. We've got a song that's selected that we're going to use as an encouragement to us this morning, to all who are here, a song of invitation, we often call it. If there's a public need that you have in your service to the Lord, if you need to put on Christ in baptism, we have the opportunity to do that this morning. We can help you with that. Or if you need prayers of the congregations, our elders are here. We'd be happy to pray for you. If we can assist you in a public manner this morning, let us know as we stand together as we sing.